I'm super excited to have you here, Jeff Kushmerek, Infinite Renewals. You have a ton of really deep CS experience. I know I've been following you on LinkedIn, seen all your stuff.
My
You've
apologies.
that is not, not your sort of run-of-the-mill HubSpot consultant,
Yeah.
DevOpsy, sort of focused on the CRM type stuff, right? And we're going to talk today about what is possible and why you're excited. You keep telling me that you're excited about the HubSpot CS workspace, which anybody who knows my stuff and what I've done, CS in HubSpot has been something that I've talked
Your
about
jam.
since
Absolutely.
almost
Yeah.
before HubSpot was talking about it. And now we have a workspace. We have actual features named for customer success in HubSpot. For somebody who's been, working in CS specific tools, why do I need to buy that? Can I do this in HubSpot? Why are you excited about it? What makes it actually possible to run a real CS function in
Yeah.
HubSpot?
Well, there's a lot there. So the reasons for my excitement, and then we can get into some of the technicalities beyond that, is that we work with a variety of different sizes of companies, from usually, not too much pre-revenue all the way up to, billion-dollar companies. And there was a segment of customers that when we would talk to them, we go and interview them and we're trying to figure out what's going on. And it was like, man, they need some automation, right? And so, if we had Salesforce companies, I would go to their Salesforce app and I'm like, here's some automations to go build in a dashboard. There you go, right? Because it's a CRM, right? So, we would say that to some of the HubSpot people, but it was a little harder, right? And then when I was pretty platform agnostic on the CS side for a few years, then I had a few investing companies that I would work with, and they would have us talk to their portfolios, and they would say, we only want our companies to use this one or that one, and we want it to be this one. And I also, a lot of people don't know this, I helped roll out Gainsight in 2014 or 15. So back in the day, but it kind of back then looked like a lot of what we're doing with the workspace now. So I would always feel bad because, building software costs money, building features out there costs money. And these companies are essentially replicating a CRM, right? I mean, and then adding in some special sauce and everything like that. But, to do things like that and build the integrations and all the things that you need to do, that costs money, and then you have to charge money for it. So when I was working with these companies, and I'll slow down, I'm halfway through the Nero here, and I just realized I'm fast Boston talking here. But so I realized that people were not going to be able to afford those solutions, right? And it was really hard for me to say, I think some automation would be great, but you got to go spend at least $30,000 a year plus an implementation fee. And that's not going to be live for like 3 to 6 months based on data, because data always been dealing with data. I used to write Perl back in the day and all this crap, and it's just dirty, right? And everybody's data is dirty, no doubt about it, right? So fast forward to HubSpot launching their stuff and then going through about a year's worth of beta and everything and ironing out some of the things that are needed. First of all, it's not $30,000, $40,000 a year. It's whatever Service Hub seats cost, and most people are on that anyways in this age. And then the data's there already, right? Like you go in, we talk to a customer, and we turn on the dashboard and associate the CSM, and boom, there you go. It's all right there, right? Yeah. And so for that, like the things that made those, we do occasional platform, engagements where we're helping launch one of those things, and all of them too. We've seen every one of them. That's where everything rolled to a standstill. And just to be completely transparent about yes, we want to help companies. As you know, when you consult to people, people want to see results, right? Now, if I'm a consultant and I come in and say, you need to go do X, and that X takes them like a month or two to do a vendor eval, and then it takes them another 3 or 4 months to get launched off the thing. Another problem is that with CS, to start pushing back against, I always view that old wheel from from Lost where they're pushing it really hard to get going. And that to me is like what you need to do to start getting customers you've ignored back into your good graces, essentially, right? And it takes a little bit to get there. Like sending out one like, hey, let's do a QBR 30 days before your renewal, pretty transparent. I always call it CSM drunk dialing. So you need to start building up those things. And that's when people start seeing like the value of the work that we do for people. And if we just stick, 4 to 6 months in the middle of that, launching some new software, I'm like, oh man, these people aren't seeing the results that they want, right? So that's I think that all of those factors combined got me like super passionate. And I don't know if you remember this, but I recorded a video almost a year ago, like, what the hell's going on with this HubSpot thing? Like, because I was so excited for it to get going, and I literally could not find any demos or anything to get going on it and stuff. So there's your answer. That's why we got super excited, right? So.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating the way you sort of talked through some of that. I talked about, the connected customer platform inbound 2022, we're now in 2025. And I think that's really the crux of this, right? I think that we saw that at Arrows as sort of the investment there. It's like, instead of going and rebuilding a lot of the pieces that you need to run any motion which touches your customers, where you need context, you need to know what engagement looks like, you need to know all these things. If you can build on top of the system that already has that, whether you're a service provider or building software, you actually have the ability to get a much more complete picture of what's going on and then do things that are actually going to make an impact on those customers. So I know there's CS programs and CS, tooling, CS playbooks have a lot of variation, variety, complexity. I know your approach is a little different. And I know it sort of comes out of the things that you've seen at scale, the things that you've seen with bigger companies, and just across a lot of different scenarios. For somebody who's looking at HubSpot, who doesn't have the HubSpot or the team in HubSpot yet for CS, like, what does that transition path look like so that it's not a 6 or 9 month project?
Yeah, we've learned a lot too, and we've, when we've migrated people over and they've had like 15 playbooks and things like that, and very conditionally logic and things like that. I think those are all needed at some point in time. I think anybody who's dealt with change management or rolling out new applications and like, look, I'm an old man. I've been through launching on-premise software and that was my life for many years, and having to train people and get them used to stuff and everything. And that if you're launching up stuff, the interesting thing is that for a lot of the people that are going to be using HubSpot's CS space, they don't have the processes essentially. We go through and we do our evaluation. We talk to people for about a week or so, and it's 90% of the time they're just clinging on for life, trying to do it again. So if you suddenly launch them with 15 playbooks that are going to fire off like 5 tasks per each, and then they have like 100 companies that they're looking after, I saw when we launched Gainsight at Virgin. It was just like, it's too much. People start writing email rules to go into the junk bin, and then suddenly you as a CS leader, in your exec meetings, you're like, yeah, nobody's really using it. I don't know what I need to do, incentive programs. So we, for the majority of people that were launching on HubSpot, we just said, look, what are the things that you need to be doing that are essentially it, right? You need some sort of risk play, right? You need some, I'll break. So with risk, if you've been doing this for a while, you might have a person left the company, a low usage play. And I'm like, look, at a series A or B company, let's look at, they're all the same activities, right? Let's go look at their usage, who talked to who when, blah, 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 give them a ring, get on the phone, fly out, have a steak dinner, whatever you want to do, right? And so that's your risk play, right? Instead of needing 5 different variations of that, get people hitting the reps, doing the same thing over and over and over again, right? Actually learned a lot at Virgin because we were teaching patterns with BJ Fogg and incentives and all this other stuff. And it's like, get people doing these activities. They'll start seeing the benefits about 30 days into it and everything. So let's get them going on some basic things, right? If we took this to fitness, just go walk 5,000 steps every day, right? And then after that 10,000, then maybe eat a little better, right? And so for us, this is how we're doing it. And then it's like, okay, what is something else that we need to do? We need to have some type of business cadence. I don't want to say it's a quarterly business review. It's what everybody thinks. It could be different tiers, have different types of things, but we need some type of cadence because it's very proven out there that if you're not showing companies the ROI that they're getting from your software, they're probably going to churn. Even if they're getting the ROI, if you're not telling them, they're probably moving on, and probably 3 to 4 months before, if you're lucky. If you're very sticky, if you're like an ERP and everything, it might be 6 to 8 months. So what's your relationship cadence from there? So there's your risk, there's your relationship, and then there's your renewal cadence, right? And so that's where we're really starting a lot of people in there, and cover those bases off, get you doing those sort of 3 most important types of activities. And then from there you can build on and things like that. But as I said, a lot of these people aren't used to these formalized types of processes out there. These all start making sense when you start getting into some of the more nuanced things, and it's just a lot for one person to start with. You see it in the trainings; they're like, "Oh my God, what do I do then?" And so we've done this a lot, and that's what we learned. So.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that sort of all the experience brings you back to the basics.
It's right.
It's
kind of like what I said about the gain site. Like it kind of looks like the success space does right now. It's like, well, who are my customers? Who's new? Who's at risk? And I love how everything's really based off of a churn score, which you can make very complicated if you want to, but otherwise it's like, yeah, this all makes sense, right? You should be able to look at these things and say, that makes sense, right? So absolutely.
Yeah, to talk a little bit sort of more, not necessarily tactically, but a little bit more about the customer success workspace itself and sort of where that fits in the HubSpot ecosystem, right? One of the things that's interesting is that HubSpot is, of course, sort of a sprawling platform today, right? Like you can do a whole lot of things. It really is a jumping off point to even just with sort of the out of the box functionality, let alone what you can build on top of it or integrate or, use custom objects for. How do you think about the things that are new in the customer success workspace versus just sort of the general functionality that being a CRM you get for running a CS function?
There's a few things that I like. I like, first of all, how it looks like the rest of the platform, right? You log in, oh, that's what it is. And then as a CS person, you log in, and I don't know if we're recording or not, like the names make sense. Like this is what I would expect to see, right? And so it's not too atypical for somebody who's worked in success. Maybe they've had experience with a platform or not, but I can tell you, I was talking with a very large VC that we all know, but I can't mention the name. And when they were like, "Can I see it?" Right? Because we all know for a little while it's like Bigfoot, and I was like, "Sure." And they were like, "What about this? What about this?" And I was just kind of like scrolling through and showing them stuff. And this person have seen everything and said, "Yeah, it's all there." And I was like, "It's like everything that you need's there, first of all, and it's not full of a lot of stuff that you're like, what is that, right?" Don't buy a battleship when you need a canoe is what I usually say there, right? There's a lot of functions and features out there. I don't need a video AI, model for these people yet, and things like that. I don't need, all the stuff that you can get with some of the other platforms. Some of the other stuff, and I don't know if you heard Yamini on the, I think it's like the Logan Bartlett podcast or whatever, but she was talking about this flywheel motion, right? About how everything is sort of integrated in, and how I was thinking all the pain in the ass questions we get in CS, like, how's that customer doing, right? So the health score, not the churn score, the health score is available throughout the whole platform now, right? So the salesperson, how's that person doing? How's that key company doing? Maybe they're trying to upsell, go into a new BU. They see what the health score is. The marketing team doesn't send out an email blast to a pissed off customer and things. It's bringing all those pieces together. I have so many Miro and system diagram documents of how to make that work with other companies. And it's it is just duct tape, and there's a lot of integrations. One company changes one field name, everything else breaks, and I just know how hard it is to get that simple.
Yeah, I think to the integration piece and the sort of value of having a connected space for all of the teams that are interacting with the customer, and HubSpot now is sort of improving the ability to customize records for different teams, for different people who are looking at that record based on what they specifically need to see. But, not all integrations are made equal, not all integrations work all the time, and that sort of context that gets lost in the gap, right?
Totally.
Check the box if we integrate with X doesn't necessarily mean that it gives you what your team
Well,
needs.
and it's funny that you just remind. That's a great point, because about a year or two into it, I was like, just make the CRM the system of records. CRM SOR is what I was always writing in my RFP responses. CRM SOR, because if they all have to play nice with the Salesforce or the HubSpot, then you're good. But if you're building out the foreign key relationship, essentially the outside connections, that's when everything goes, oh yeah, we got a Zapier thing, we built it a year ago, we'll change that later if people complain. That's how life goes. You build those things, those are the last things that you do if it's not core to the CRM.
For sure. And I think the thing that's interesting too is it becomes not just another system that the day-to-day team interacting with the customer has to deal with. It's another system that has to be maintained, to your point about the Zapier thing. It's
another hire, right? Another person that you've got to hire to be looking at that, or 50% of their time is going in and tweaking things and stuff like that.
Yeah. So you mentioned the sort of bring it back to basics, focus on the sort of simple fundamentals, simple, not easy, I'm assuming here. What are some of the things that, even when you bring it back to this level, what are some of the sort of gotchas that, HubSpot aside, that people should be paying attention to as they're thinking about, maybe it's, formalizing your CS process a little more. You're moving from spreadsheets to a dedicated tool that your team is going to live in. What are some of the things that you want to make sure at this sort of process level you keep? I know you mentioned a couple of them with the risk play, but sort of what are the things that you're that are gotchas for folks you talk to?
Most of the gotchas we've seen have been around, this will open up your data to a new group of people that are trying to write rules to something, and we see lots of issues with how people have created their data. A lot of people in the startup phase, they've just kind of gone in and done whatever they needed to do to get going. And so you see things with parent-child relationships and things like that. So then you just need to get into some rules do you work, if you've got a parent-child relationship with your accounts, do you treat them all individually versus that? And so it's just there's nothing that's not fixable or whatever, but it's sort of these new rules that you'll write in to it. And it's also, how much of the customer process do you want is your CSM managing? Are they doing onboarding, for example? Do we need to what do we do for onboarding? Do we create a pipeline? Do we use tickets? Do we use the service piece and the new objects and things like that? So again, we start off with the basics, what's working, and then sort of build your way up. I'm not sure if I answered your question the way you're looking for, by the way, but that's what we've seen.
It's interesting that these are not necessarily CS specific problems, right? They're just sort of data or company data.
So one thing around the back to the basics that I have seen, except for one, we've done a bunch of these now, and it was just one where I was kind of leading the show and was kind of there. They didn't have a CS leader at the time, so I was like, no, this is what we're doing. But it gets around overcomplicating the health score. Health score is this thing that it can spider off fast, because you can suddenly any data element, whether it's internal or external, can be made as part of the health score, and that it gets to look if you make everything, if you have 10 items that are 10%, you don't really know what makes a difference, right? Again, regardless of the platform, when it comes to health score, it's let's go for big chunks here and see what really makes the difference. And then if we want to start factoring in stuff, right? So if you got, so as an example, not everybody's platform in SaaS is a usage dependent thing. There's a lot of platforms out there where you'll set it and forget it, and then they never have to log into your platform again, and it's doing all this stuff in the background. On the opposite side of that, If you're like an ERP or CRM or whatever, that's a system that you force people to use every day. So that usage isn't necessarily that great. And so you just need to like kind of, again, forest from the trees. Like, what are the things that really make the difference? And people say, well, what did you do before the data? And that's the world that I lived in, right? I would call people up like, hey, you called us because your web servers weren't fast enough and you were trying to increase your average order conversion, right? Are you getting those things, right? And so you need to ask yourself, you have all access to a lot of data. What are the things that would make you actually call up a customer and say, hey, is everything going okay? Are you getting the outcomes that you were looking for? And not what you're trying to drive, but what the customers are looking for, right? So
Yeah, you got to my next question already, which is the difference between the data that you can track on your side, that you have access to because it's in your system, your database, your engagement data, whatever, and what the customer actually cares about, which is on their side and their system. How do you think about that gap more broadly? And maybe you just said it.
very easy.
Talk to
But we every time we go talk to a customer, we start in pre-sales and we end at like renewal or churn or whatever, and in whatever stages go beyond that. And so you always hear like, oh, we never get from the sales team what the reason why they bought. I'm like, well, that just expect that won't happen, and just get that at your kickoff and memorialize that somewhere, right? And so again, I always bring it back to this. Somebody had a pain point enough, so much so that they went out and started Googling and AI seeking and what is the best thing to fix this problem. And they chose your software. And you need to keep asking them what those reasons were. And then you need to find out what data elements that you can track to make sure that they're getting those elements, right? Sometimes that can be usage. Sometimes it's not that easy, and you've got to say like, okay, let's send them a CSAT, let's send them an MBS here, let's see what their usage is. Are they answering emails? Are they showing up to meetings? You can get all of these elements now in your CRM. But again, what makes the most sense here, right? And then we always throw in CSM sentiment, which is I'm not even sure if it's a default field, but we make it a default field because if you don't have usage data or if it's too complicated to get into or it's just been pushed down the line, your CSM usually can go log into somewhere and see what and they'll get off the phone and they talk to people and they can mark their sentiments or whatever. So we always say like start easy, and there's some people 5 years ago on one of my podcasts that said, CSM sentiment is the number one data element that we rely on right now because they just didn't have access to a lot of the data. So start there and fold in the things that make the most sense based on that joint success ROI story that we were talking about.
Yeah. One thing that you mentioned sort of two things that are interesting here. One, CRM is typically a tool that people are sort of forced to use, right? It's like the thing that you have to log into every day. It's just where you do your work.
Don't get your commissions unless you logged it in the CRM, right?
Yeah. But the other that you mentioned is that the HubSpot CS workspace sort of looks like the rest of HubSpot, right? And it also looks, pretty similar to maybe other CS platforms from a sort of fundamentals perspective. How do you think about the role of a tool and sort of the implementation work and the way that you work with teams in driving adoption for that team, right? Like, how do you make sure that the tool actually is used to the point where it's helpful in somebody's day-to-day, not...
It's interesting because I actually hadn't thought about this as an answer, but it's what we typically do is that we train the team to run their business through these tools essentially, right? So first of all, outside of the process stuff is that I usually encourage whoever's running the CS team to have some element of a KPI for what I call as adherence standards. Well, we bought this tool. This tool, if we use it properly, will fix the problem that we mentioned there, but you need to make it part of your everyday thing, right? So that's something as a manager, you can log in, you can see what people are doing and things like that, right? So if you make it like, it's not just because I've rolled a lot of these tools out over the years and you expect, they're still using the spreadsheet, but you got to delete the spreadsheet, right? And, or don't log into Zendesk anymore because you're not doing support tickets. They're still logging into Zendesk, right? So we make it part of their process and let them know that they'll get KPI on that usually as a thing. But beyond that, because that seems a little draconian, we just basically say so we run account health meetings, CS health meetings, kind of like CS like sales teams run pipelines, right? And we create these dashboards. They're part of every customer we work with. We just know, like, you need this dashboard. What does that look like? For every CSM, red, yellow, green by order, or by some fun elements of risk and ACV and ARR and days to renewal and things like that, right? And so if you're meeting every week and you're driving it through, by the way, I was going to post about this, but it's hard to grab screenshots and of customers and everything. But like, one of our customers is super, it's got to be in the CRM. Everything's HubSpot, everything's X. And without me forcing it upon them, they just started running their weekly meeting with this report, and let's go through it. And by the way, if you haven't updated your data, it's an uncomfortable conversation. And so that's how it is. You need to drive your business, your weekly things. I'm a big weekly person fan. 2 weeks go by, suddenly it's starting to lose grasp and things like that. So that's how we're kind of doing it. I don't even feel like it's force feeding, because I know it works, and you should be meeting and talking about risk mitigation. Like, that's what you're doing. Like, the job of CS, right, to be 100% clear from my perspective, is you're protecting revenue. So how do you protect revenue? Every week you get together and you talk about, in reverse sort of order, with your highest yellow is more important than your lowest red, and you're just kind of working your way through that. And when I say highest, I mean by dollar and how much they're paying you per year.
Yeah,
and
it's
so
the inverse of that sales pipeline meeting, right? It's like they start with highest dollar value and closest to close, and you just go the opposite direction.
Well, I'll make it very. You have two customers, right? One pays you $100,000 a year, and another pays you $20,000. The $100,000 is in yellow, and the $20,000 is in red. Which one do you go work on?
Probably the 100,000.
You're right. You would think so, right? But the red yells a lot, so they focus their time on that. Yeah. Nobody likes getting yelled at.
Yeah, this is very, very true. And I think it's interesting you bring up that point. And you mentioned this too, with the sort of the cadences and the things you're trying to implement from a actual sort of implementation of the system perspective. It's like, how do you do the basics well? It's like, how do you bring rigor to the process of protecting revenue, right? To sort of, I guess, sort of close the loop here and sort of wrap things up here. For teams that are, like, oh, like, I see that HubSpot has this new thing. It's, they're sort of making this push into really trying to fulfill on the connected platform full customer lifecycle promise. What's been the biggest sort of objection that you've got to, like, okay, I can actually go do this in HubSpot, and like, here's why? Or maybe this is already. Like,
I'm thinking about that. So I don't see objection in that first band of customers that are essentially clutching, dog paddling to stay afloat, and running through spreadsheets. They're like, thank God, right? And the objection is usually around buying software at that thing. And so where I'm seeing is this next level of customers who are already using something, and they are getting a mandate to streamline and keep everything in one system, or somebody loves HubSpot and they want everything to be in HubSpot, and they're saying, what about this report, what about this functionality, what about that, right? I get a lot of those. And the thing I'd say is that it's all there that you can do a lot of, right? And a lot of these systems have, what we said in the beginning, built out replicate CRMs and things like that. But you mentioned two platforms. What are their two big upsells? The Renewal Center. That's a CRM report, right? Like, the integrations are already there. So I've seen a lot of stuff into like dashboards, playbook creation, things like that. And then it gets into like, okay, well, am I going to need another person to monitor and maintain this? And the answer is usually not. Those are like some of the biggest things around that. A lot of people see all the big complicated things when you go onto those platforms, pages and things like that. And what about the connection to X, Y, and Z? So I basically bring it down to, go check your usage on that thing. And are you getting a lot of usage on that? If so, that's, bring again, like, so let's start with base and then fold in the things that make the most sense to us, right? So
There's a lot of companies out there that don't have a dedicated HubSpot admin, don't have a dedicated RevOps function, don't have like somebody who owns HubSpot baseline. Where do you and what you're offering, where does it fit? And like, who is it the right fit for if you're in that sort of boat of like, I need to figure out CS and build more process around it?
again, I like to be judged on the effectiveness of what we roll out, right? So if I, for example, I've worked for professionals, I've ran professional services teams that made money by billing the shit out of customers, right? Like, and I'm not doing that here. So we basically have built. So remember, when we started talking to HubSpot about this, right? I was talking to people that are, run these platforms, and they really liked it because we are domain experts first, not SIs. I've run SIs, but we currently, for the first 5 years, we were not an SI. We were domain experts, right? So we brought our domain expertise to this platform and said, everybody needs this. Like, we know it, right? Everybody, the base level thing, this is what you get. And for most people out there, I'm like, here you go. This is all that you need, right? Hey, if somebody I don't say everybody needs a dedicated thing to go forward and move forward, but we all know that CS is at the small table during Thanksgiving, and they have very few access to resources. So I don't say we're going to rent you a HubSpot system admin. What I basically say is, let's think about creating a punch list, and then maybe say, here's somebody for 2 months to help you just knock down this punch list, and go from there. And then maybe they'll go build a punch list again and then ask us to come back or something like that. I for what we're talking about here, I don't see the dedicated need. We all know some of those platforms out there need that. Data changes, all these things are needed, go create X, Y, and Z and stuff like that. So, what I would say is that regardless, if you're not using something, or if you're using the most complicated thing out there, we've mapped that all out. You can have all of that. You can have all of that for the cost of 1 year, essentially, and then it's yours for good, and it's just a seat count cost for HubSpot. And it's built by people that have spent, I think, combined 100 years in post-sales when you look at my team. And we just basically have just put a lot of our blood, sweat, and tears of knowledge into creating something that can get deployed real fast and have outcomes. And that's why I get super passionate about it, because I'm not like, does this work? It's like, no, we've done this, and now we found something that we can roll out really fast for the people that it makes sense, right? Like if you're on that platform and that's the one that you're going with and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't want that, right? You roll it out really fast and it gets results.
I know it sounds crazy, like our approach is we'll go in and talk to your whole team for a week. We'll go look at all your, we've done so many audits over the years that we see a lot. We know the patterns to look for. We know the questions to ask. And to be honest, for what we're talking about with the HubSpot rollout, they usually need this foundational element, right? And that can get live in 2 weeks after talking to us. It's insane, but because we don't have those integration issues and things like that. So